Welcome to a new conversation about software engineering. Today we are talking with Andrew Harmel-Law from ThoughtWorks, author of Facilitating Software Architecture and also Architecture Metrics. I didn't know about it until I checked your website.
Yeah, just one chapter.
Exactly. We are happily talking about the book Facilitating Software Architecture, how we can make better architecture decisions. So welcome everyone. Welcome Andrew.
Thank you.
Welcome Heinrich. Welcome Alex.
Hello everyone.
Hello.
Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
The book, I think the book came out already 2 years ago. It's quite
1 year.
What? Oh,
1
really?
year.
1 year.
Yeah,
Okay.
1 year this month. So it's
okay.
literally a year old.
I gave
happy birthday.
Thank you.
I gave a training course in software architecture last year. I think it was last year, but maybe it was beginning of this year. And then one of the attendees showed me the book and I was totally shocked, kind of. There is an O'Reilly book on facilitating software architecture and I don't know about it. I mean, it was terrible feeling. Then I bought the book and I must say, we come back to it later. After the first pages, I was like, that's not a book for me. And then I skipped some pages and I started like chapter 2, let's say chapter 2. And then I was like, I had this kind of team topologies moment, which means, we know this for quite some time. And how can it be that it took so long that someone thankfully wrote it down? And ever since, I'm really happy. I give everyone in my course, not the book, but I always show the book and say, please buy this book. All right. So now what is the book about? Brief outline, what we want to talk about today. We want to talk about architecture significant decisions, architecture decision records, software architecture advice forums, and software architecture advice process. And a little bit of context setting. We are just assuming now, maybe we can move course later, that the teams we are talking about, they already own their decision, or they had at least some say in decision, so that we exclude the whole ivory tower architect thing. We have to skip.
Yep.
All right.
Can I ask a beginner question? What is software architecture?
That's a good. I dodged this. If you read this, I dodged this question almost explicitly in the chapter because. So I do have opinions about it.
But just to kind of set some boundaries, because I think it goes into modeling, right? How do you send your classes? And it goes into like distributed systems, like components, and it goes into teams and organizational design. So at somewhere there are boundaries. And like, how would you kind of like delineate it?
So it's a good question. And I think chapter 2, one of the chapters is me kind of trying to tackle this because it kind of depends. But I am now going to try and answer the question. So what like Sven mentioned as well, what I tried to say is the thing that seemed important to me and the thing that I think when you look at it from this perspective, it is a way to unblock the system of practicing architecture. To me, software architecture is kind of like the sum total of all of the significant decisions, specifically the ones that got into the code, because I was haunted by a quote from Alberto Brandolini, which is something like, your software architecture is the developer's assumption as to what you said, or it's what everyone heard and then they turned into code. It's not necessarily the pictures on a whiteboard or any of those other things. So it's kind of the sum total of all of the decisions, implicit and explicit, intentional and unintentional. And architecturally, and this is the boundary where I try and draw the line between, like, people talk about design and architecture. The architectural ones are probably the bigger, sharper, scarier ones you hope you got right more than the ones which are like smaller or hopefully have less impact. I do spend quite a lot of time maybe too much time, some people would say, in the book trying to define what is significant, because like you can update your Maven, a Maven dependency in Spring, which will then bring in a transitive dependency, which will later on completely depth charge your entire architecture. That feels like a very small thing, which isn't even specifically an architectural decision. Other times you can spend months and months thinking about something which doesn't really matter because you think it's big. So, but yeah, it's the sum total of the decisions which have a longer term, bigger picture impacts, maybe across more teams or across a broader scope or whatever. And that kind of goes to, like, I think Martin Fowler's definition of things which are hard or expensive to change. It goes to some of the other definitions, but my framing was specifically around about decisions, because what Sven said, I tried to bring that together and say, this is the core of the practice, then everything else sits around it. And if we get good at deciding there and communicating those decisions, then architecture kind of unlocks and becomes useful and valuable and in the code and all of those kind of things. So that's kind of, I mean, whoever reads the book can be the judge of whether I was successful, but that was kind of my goal. So,
yeah. Martin Fowler also had another interesting definition, because there is this official ISO or IEEE definition. It's about components and relationships between components or major components and cross-cutting concerns.
Yep.
And principles guiding the development. And Martin Fowler once said, he has a very famous article, Who Needs an Architect? IEEE is like 20 years old.
Yeah.
And I hope I say it wrong, right. Sorry. What is architecture? It's about the important stuff. What is important? It's what the senior developers say is important. So it's a bit wishy-washy, but I think it's true. Yeah, if you have very senior people, they know exactly. This is something we shouldn't. This is a decision we shouldn't do lightheartedly, right? We cannot decide this now. It's like a big thing, or we can decide it now. Who cares?
Yeah, precisely. Yeah.
Talking about this significance, then, I guess that not everyone starts as a senior, right? And I'm quite often asked, like, okay, how do I identify whether I can take a decision or not? Andrew, what would you say?
Well, so the quick answer is, as I outline in the book, if you follow the advice process, and the book talks about the architecture advice process, but I just stuck the word architecture on the front of the advice process. So the advice process comes from trust organizations, and the answer is anyone can take any decision as long as, and there's two important caveats. Number one, they seek advice, which doesn't mean permission, it doesn't mean approval, it doesn't mean consensus, but they seek advice and not opinions, advice, which is like reasoned thinking. They seek advice from people who are affected, and a nice way of thinking about that is either, will you put something on someone else's backlog, or are you spending money that doesn't belong to you, or are you deploying resource, which is maybe the backlog thing, right? You're making someone do some work which you don't control, right? And people with expertise. So people, if you just speak to people who are affected, maybe there's some smart person, like Sven said, right? There's an expert who's done this before and will tell you that graph databases do not solve all of your problems, but they're not in an affected team. You definitely want to find that person and say, please tell me what went wrong in 1987 when you built your own graph database and you thought you were the smartest people in the room and stuff blew up.
It's interesting that you picked this example.
Yeah, exactly. Graph databases. I may have heard about this with graph. So, and so this is, and because this is I do agree that the more, I think architecture is theory and practice. So I'm spending a lot of time, like I don't know if I want to write another book, but the thing I'm interested in now is like how people learn to become architects, and there's theory in this practice. And I think one of the problems with architecture is people think they just need to know a lot. But I think they devalue the things that they've done. And I also think you knowing everything is an anti-pattern. Everybody, the collective knowing everything, that's important, right? If you know a smart person, that person wants to share their advice and things, then you can power up everybody. But it's like that person needs to be willing to share that advice. And so this is where this is what I think is powerful about the book. It kind of unlocks like it turns, this is a Diana Montalian phrase, knowledge stocks, which is what we value. I'm smart, I know these things, I'm a senior developer because I've seen it and done it. And you turn it into knowledge flows, and then you can, maybe junior developers or people with less experience are still junior, but they can benefit from the experience more frequently, more real time of, like pair programming is another way of doing this, right? You sit with someone and you see and learn. Because if you get that kind of stuff, you can suddenly, it removes a lot of the boundaries and a lot of the smart stuff kind of comes in. And then it can be, and then people can, it's the acceleration of learning for me is terrifying. People who pay attention to stuff and and listen and learn and things, it's very interesting. So,
what do you think about unlearning? Because I had this wonderful example where someone said, but Alex, I have 10 years of experience. Isn't it sufficient if I say we always did it like this, so let's do it like this?
Yeah, this is the hardest thing is, I think, because when I was at my previous company before ThoughtWorks, we were like, TDD and pair programming is really good. We should all do it. The hardest people to get to adopt those practices and even to acknowledge that they were okay, maybe not even great, right? We weren't saying you have to love them, were the people who had done it differently, or we've always done it differently the other way. They were very closed off, apart from a few who were like, oh, okay, let's see. And suddenly they would learn amazing things, but they'd have to unlearn. And that was very interesting. And it's not for everybody, right? But yeah, it's like the curse of too much knowledge, right? It can sometimes blind you to stuff. And that's, the anyone can decide thing is quite nice, because then it makes you can't just say no, because it's the advice process, right? I'm not asking for your approval, I'm just asking for your input. If it works, when it does work, you're like, right, don't do this because here is the reason why. These are the things I know, and then the knowledge is shared and all that kind of stuff, and it becomes very powerful. So
now you mentioned unlearn and also the advice process. I want to jump to the advice process, but one word about unlearn. We in our, let's say, pre-show talk, we mentioned Barry O'Reilly. You know which one?
Yeah, which Barry?
But the other, the ex-ThoughtWorks Barry O'Reilly, by the way, wrote a book about unlearning, which is probably an interesting read.
Yeah, totally. It's very. And this is the thing that's interesting about unlearning. As things move fast, unlearning becomes more important, right? Because the things that were correct today are definitely not correct tomorrow. And that happens a lot faster these days. It's very, it's very interesting.
I think that's the biggest challenge that we have nowadays, to understand, like, if we look back 2 years from now, most of us are actually doing a completely different job. And would we only have the skills we had 2 years ago, we wouldn't be able to do our jobs today. So this unlearning is, in my point of view, a prerequisite for rapid skill acquisition.
This is that Kent quote, like after Kent spent 3 days working with LLMs, like coding LLMs, and was like, I've just spent 3 days I'm guessing how much long it was. I've just spent 3 days. 90% of my skills were irrelevant. 10% of my skills are now completely worth more than anything. And Kent's right. And Kent thinks about this a lot, right? It's very
Kent Beck, you mean?
Yeah, Kent Beck.
Architecture advice process. You mentioned it so many times now. So we have architecture significant requirements or decisions to make. You know, it's whatever affects other people, what senior people say is important. You know, what maybe important stakeholders have an interest in this. Quality attributes like security, performance, availability, stuff like that. So if we do in this area, usually we have architecture significant requirements. So now the question is, how can we as a team make a good decision? And you mentioned it already a few times. If you follow the advice process and if you take the advice. So what is the advice process?
So the advice process is, like I say, it's a very simple process. And so the idea is like I said, actually, anyone can make a decision as opposed to, so it moves responsibility and accountability to anyone as long as they want to. So it doesn't mean everyone has to make a decision, but it means if I want to make a decision, I can say there is a decision which needs to be taken and I will take responsibility for it. and I'm accountable for it, which is very important, right? It doesn't mean I'm going to decide something, but it's still Sven's fault because Sven is the architect. And to do that, to take a decision, you need to go and figure out what the decision is in front of you, kind of scope it. If you're doing an ADR, you'd write the context of the thing and maybe identify some of the options for different ways of doing it. And then you would seek advice. And like I said, advice is, and you seek it from people who are affected and experts. The advice is specifically like reasoned feedback and input into the thing. And it might be advice on the options, right? So like we think we're going to pick a new programming language and therefore the options are this, this, and this. And then the advice might be use Java because it's better and there's lots of people who know how to program in it. But the advice might also be in the framing of the context. It might be in the identification of the options. Maybe there's a fourth option that someone's missed or whatever. It can be in lots of different things, or the advice can be, and this is where I think is very interesting for the practice of architecture. One thing that architects have is like this large network of human beings that they know, right? Their job is not so focused in on one team. Their job is typically to know about people. They know that they need to speak to these people. They know that this is the technical strategy. They know that this old system has got things that you can't touch on it. So they can also provide advice and say, right, you should speak to these people. You should listen to these people. I would worry about this kind of thing. Have you remembered about this kind of thing? And they can, through that, not just say, this is good, this is bad, but they can say, here is how to think. Here is how I have thought in the past. Here is how I like to consider these kind of things. And so then you get the theory is you get this kind of spreading slowly of architectural thinking around about things. So you kind of build this knowledge system of people doing the practice of architecture. And in my experience, as long as there is trust, so this doesn't work everywhere, to be very clear. It has worked everywhere I've tried it, apart from one place, and that one place had shockingly low levels of trust, and they had far bigger problems than the fact that they couldn't make good architectural decisions. But everywhere else, it was very interesting to see, because most people want to do a good job and they want to build systems which they can live with and evolve and be proud of. And that is a nice kind of way of doing it. And the advice process is, it removes the unnecessary hierarchy and just kind of centers the skills and the knowledge and expertise of people, which is given that software is a collective act. It's not just like someone thinks really hard and then everyone else types. Everyone is doing some level of architectural design thinking at all stages in the process, right? It's just that we value some of them more than we value others. So,
from personal experience, what if the person that wants to take a decision and says, I'm accountable, doesn't see or understand the relevant criteria, or that they actually are not accountable, so they cannot take the accountability?
Yep, it's a good question.
Maybe before you answer that, so we are talking about a team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, typically
and the team
it's a team.
has some sort of lead developer.
Yeah,
and the team is working on their service, on their system. That's what you mean, Alex, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Does not necessarily have to be the service or the system. It could be any decision that the team takes, but that is actually beyond the accountability of the team.
And you're right, because there will be. So this is the thing, again. So with more traditional ways of doing architecture, which we're not talking about, right? You have architects who have general accountability. So the problem doesn't arise usually doesn't arise because I am accountable for everything, right? Whereas now I could do things like you said that could have impacts where I'm not accountable. And so that's where the key part is, and this is not in the advice process, like the vanilla advice process that's used in nursing companies and nuclear power generation companies and things. The architecture one is you need to write decisions down as an ADR. So when you make your decision, you write an ADR. Then when you say, we're thinking of doing this, then you seek advice. The advice gets written down on the ADR as well, either as comments or whatever, and then ideally is incorporated into the ADR. The key thing is, though, is that the ADR continues to exist with that advice, right? So you could have, in a bad scenario, a sociopathic person who could like make a decision, go and seek all the advice. Everyone says, don't do this. This is completely a disaster. You're spending money that doesn't belong to you. You're exposing us to security risks that, you have no power over to control or whatever. But if those things are written down in the ADR, I've never seen anyone who then says, right, I'm going to ignore all of this valid stuff and just completely take this decision anyway. So there's a kind of, as Rita, my O'Reilly editor, said, there's basically a social contract. I trust you to decide well and listen to my advice, and you trust me to decide well and listen to your advice. And it's very self-correcting, and the transparency of the information is what keeps it working, unless someone's a sociopath. I have not yet come across a sociopath, and then if you are hiring a sociopath, then there's probably a bigger problem. But that keeps it. What's good is, though, and this is the other thing, I learned this from Kat Morris, who's an ex-colleague, sometimes people are really worried about it, and what's really nice is you can say, instead of doing a decision, let's do a spike, because people just can't decide, right? They're like, I know I'm right, you're wrong, and the other people are like, I know you're wrong, I'm right. You can spike something, which is very safe, right? But it's actual real code, and you can see if it works. So you still take the decision, but in a small, definitely reversible, code wins arguments kind of thing. That's what a thought worker colleague used to say. We can all have our opinions, but then you write some code, and then you're like, okay, cool, I admit it. Or typically, when you write code, we're both wrong. Neither of us are completely correct. We've built a proper spike which properly addresses the question that we've got in front of us and proved whether it was right or wrong. So,
yeah.
Now just let me stick for a second, Sven. In the concrete example, it was actually not malice, but it was people not knowing that they should consider a certain fact, they should involve someone. And specifically, the team decided to introduce a new database without thinking of disaster recovery.
Oh, yeah, nice.
So it was completely like an unknown.
Yeah. So
and
this
that
is
can
the
happen
thing,
to any one of us, right?
Yeah, 100%. And so this is where, like, people who traditionally would play these roles, that's where they step up and say, right, you definitely need to think about this. What about this? That's where those people become very important. And then if no one knows it, then it was an unknown completely outside the organization, which also occurs, right? But the role of that becomes very important. What I've experienced is people like that because typically those people find out after it's too late. If you're doing the advice process, maybe they're not included in the advice giving, but if there's an ADR, these people are responsible, like InfoSec, for example, or QA can subscribe to like the Confluence space where all of this is happening, or they know they can like listen to all the pull requests and listen to a Slack channel. They can get awareness of all of the decisions, and then they can read the ones that seem important and inject themselves into them. Like, so for example, I did stuff with a bank, and regulatory, they were like, we always get told when it's too late, but it's me that goes to court and maybe goes to prison.
Mm-hmm.
When they could see these things, most of them, they were like, we don't care. I don't even know what React Native is, right? But some stuff, they were like, whoa, you just did something which sounds like it's going to break GDPR hard, and we're all going to prison. Or not everyone, me. And so the fact it's written down, that can make, and in the open, that's a big thing, right? That can make it.
That's valuable advice. Thanks. Yeah. The subscription is a good thing.
Yeah, like this is the thing. Like putting it in the tools and like subscribing to it is very useful.
And now you said subscribe to it, to subscribe to the space. You often mentioned the ADR. One thing in the book, which I was particularly happy, I must say, was a full chapter on ADRs, architecture decision records. Why? There was this 15 years ago, Michael Nygaard writes his article about architecture decision records.
Yep.
Some stuff appeared around it, but it was all short. I'm not aware of, maybe I'm wrong, but I was not aware of, let's say, a decent good description with everything you need to know.
Yeah,
and I think in your book there was, if you are interested in ADRs, go to the book. There is a lot to learn. Maybe briefly for everyone, what is an ADR? How should you what are the elements of an ADR?
Good question. So this is, and I should actually say, ADRs are architectural decision records, because I did a presentation in Germany, and at the end someone said you didn't explain what an ADR is. So half the audience, this might not be a German problem. I think it might, but I was like, oh my God, I should have actually said. So ADRs, architectural decision records. So it was popularized, this I learned from Bruce Mallon, it was popularized by Michael Nygaard, but Michael didn't invent the idea. There's a paper from, I think, 1980 something or 90 something. Someone suggested them, and then, but it was a paper, so we don't read papers, right? So, I mean, famously, someone will write a computing science paper from 1950, and then this year we'll read it, and we're like, wow, effect-oriented program is amazing. Apart from Kevlin Henney, who reads all of these papers, right?
The cohesion paper from Constantine is like 50 years ago. I read it like 3 weeks ago.
Exactly right. And anyway, you're like, oh my God, right? So this is the thing. So Ruth is amazing. So Ruth was like, right, Michael didn't invent them. Okay. And so an ADR is, it's a short technical document that you write which documents a single decision. And I then spend later chapters trying to say how to make it single, how to make it small, et cetera, et cetera. And it has a standard, in my experience, although people add stuff, which is fine, but I've tried in the book to be like, these are the bare minimum things. So it has a standard set of things. So it has a title, has an identifier, whatever you want to call it, like ADR 001, and then sections, and I put them in this order because you write them once, but you read them a lot, hopefully. So the order I have it in is the decision is the next section, which you write last, like an abstract in a paper, right? But if I want to click on the ADR, I want to read the title, which tells me what the decision is. If I want more information, I click and I read the decision paragraph. Below that is the context. Below that are the options considered. And you don't just say we considered 3 of them and we picked option C, because each of those options should have pros and cons for the options. And then if you're following, so that's all standard Michael Nygaard stuff, although I changed the order. Because Michael Nygaard, I think, has context first. But if you want to just know the decision, you have to read through a bunch of stuff, and you're like, just tell me what you decided.
Pyramid principle.
Yeah, exactly. Like, so I spent too long speaking to Bruce Eccles. So like pyramid, like tell me at the start, and then and it works, right? You can then read, and then if you're like, oh, why is this an important decision? Then you read the context, and then you're like, right, what were the 3 options you considered, or 7 options you considered? Keep scrolling. If you want to know what were the pros and cons of the 3rd option, keep scrolling. And the last thing is the advice. So that goes in the comments if it's a Confluence page or whatever. Because ideally, if people follow the advice process, they roll the advice into the ADR. They're not obliged to, but it still keeps that history. And so things like little tricks that I've learned, which are really good, are if someone says this will be a bad idea, you can say, despite this advice, we are still picking option A. So you're acknowledging that someone disagrees with you, and you're saying, yeah, we know, we hear you. Look at the questions we had before. Or, despite this downside, we are adopting this. Or despite this positive benefit of Java 1.3, we are choosing not to adopt Java 1.3 because Java has moved on. So you can kind of acknowledge those things. The other final thing is, so ADRs are read-only when you finish writing them. So writing them, and Michael Nygaard points this out, writing them is a creative act, and architecture is creative. So you learn by thinking. So you learn by writing the ADR. And one of the key things as an architect, you can teach people to think by helping them write. When the decision has been made, it's immutable. So it's like an immutable changelog. This winds me up more than anything, and I think I made this very clear in the book. People are like, oh, we should redecide. Don't reopen the immutable ADR, have a subsequent ADR, and say, right, that was right at the time, but now we think this, so therefore we're going to do this instead. Because the amount of ADRs that I see that just get opened again and again, and you can't see the original history because it's now been overwritten 17 times. You should have like an immutable changelog, right, like Prometheus or something of stuff that goes all the way through. So
yeah, there is also, I mean, everything you said. There are also nice templates. We put them in the show notes, like markup, architecture, decision records. you can just adopt them as a listener and have those ADRs.
I was glad you liked the chapter actually, because the formatting in the chapter was the hardest thing in the world to get right. It was an absolute nightmare. So it took of all the chapters in the book, I'm glad someone likes it because as you can tell, I get really annoyed about, like, people are smart people and they make good decisions, but they can't express them in an ADR. So if people get this right, suddenly lots of the transparency and stuff, it doesn't mean that you don't need other architectural documentation, etc., but like a nice clean set of ADRs can really have a significantly transformative effect on the practice of architecture, in my experience.
Yeah. It's scaling knowledge at its best, right?
100%.
So if someone asks, why the hell are we doing it like this? Nobody explains anything. You just explain it by, here is a link, read it.
Yep.
If you don't agree, make comments. Yeah.
Yep.
Or if we missed something, edit. I think it's one of the best best tools we have to make great decisions. It's
when one thing, and there's a case study I can send you for the show notes actually. So I was at Zappo so there was the company where I kind of initially experimented with this, which is called OpenGI. Then afterwards I went to this Bitcoin bank called Zappo. So there's a Martin Fowler case study. One of the chief architects there, or architects at Zappo, had a history in technical writing. So they not only helped everyone write really good ADRs, they curated like a kind of narrative page on top. So they were like, if you've just joined, you don't need to read. And they loved ADRs because they went, blah, blah, blah. There was a lot of ADRs. But they curated a page which was like, if you're a new joiner, because they were a scale up, here are the key things you need to know, because this will tell you the story of why our architecture is like it is. And they even retrospectively went back and documented some of the key decisions, because they knew they weren't perfect, but they were like, at the time, this was the best we could do based on what we knew. And as an onboarding and kind of historical record, so powerful. And all this person had to do was like just, the ADRs were there. They were just, they just decorated it with a kind of master page. And then you could see some of the older architects expressing why this is important, why this is historical, why we, I know this feels weird, but we tried something different 3 years ago and it turned out that for some weird edge case, it doesn't scale. All of that was there. It's beautiful. It's beautiful, beautiful.
So also from personal experience, it's sometimes hard to understand whether a decision that has been made is still relevant today. So we ended up adding 2 more attributes to our ADRs. One is the minimum time to live.
Oh, yeah, perfect.
To say how long is an ADR actually supposed to be valid, and after which amount of time do we want to revisit?
Yeah.
The second is the minimum validity period, saying we take this decision now, and for at least 6 months, everyone can rely that we're not taking a different decision.
Yeah, perfect. We had a similar thing at Zappo where we took a decision because they were a very product-focused company and they were trying to move really fast. There was one thing which broke some of the principles, and this is a lovely thing to, like, actually nice things to call out in ADRs are, there's boring ADRs which are everyone agrees and blah, 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 right? We tried 3 options. We know that we're a Python company that uses Django, so we're going to decide to use Python and Django. But there was a few decisions which went against some of the corporate standards, but for product management reasons, to address a new market quickly, they were like, we are going to break the rules explicitly because it will give us this benefit, and then in 6 months' time we will revisit this. So we're incurring architectural debt and we're writing about it, we're being clear, and then in 6 months' time, like you said, Alex, right, then we're going to come back and say, okay, do we still want to keep this? Because it means that we've done something that we're not proud of, but it got us out, down the path. But now we have like a record of this thing. Do we want to then invest the recovery time to bring it back, or are we comfortable living with it, et cetera, et cetera? And it's super powerful. It builds people's trust, because you'll see people who are scared of deciding because they're like, this will be used against me later on. And you're like, write it down, right? Say you're not happy about it. This is why we do this despite the fact it's a bad idea. You can say that out loud, right? I mean, Rebecca Verse-Brock has a thing where she said another field which you can add is like how you feel about the decision. So there's another paper somewhere, which Rebecca, I'll dig it out and send it to you for show notes. But she's like, not everyone's happy with every decision they make, right? They're not super comfortable, but there's like a reason, right? Someone told us it was super important and we had to just do it. Okay. So it was very, very interesting to see that.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about like the scaling of the system and how to organize the knowledge around it? Because I can see this as something that you do maybe in a team of 2, maybe in a single code base.
Mm-hmm.
I could see something that you do that at a company scale of 100 people, and you probably need different tooling for this. And the second bit is related, which is you talked about architecture depth. Very familiar. You sometimes take these shortcuts, and just documenting that there was a shortcut's already a good step, right? But like, how do you deal with that from a kind of knowledge organization / process side, that you are kind of bringing these decisions back to the front?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the last chapter of the book, we were talking again before we started recording about, so as someone pointed out when I wrote the book is fundamentally about the advice process. So someone suggested I should use the advice process to write the book. So I wrote it for a publisher, so I can't really do that. I wasn't writing completely out in the open, but every chapter I wrote, I could publish on the O'Reilly Early Access program. And then I put my email address at the start. It was like, please send me feedback. I would love your advice. Many of the later chapters come from people going, yes, but what about? And one of them was, how does this scale? And so I kind of dodged this question. So there were 3 inspirations for the book. One was Bruce Mallon, who said that architecture is conversations. And I was like, right, this centers conversations completely. Number 2 is Alberto Brandolini that I mentioned, like, what gets shipped to prod. The real architecture is what gets the developer's assumptions about what you meant, right? That's what's the architecture running in prod. And the third thing was the power of self-organization, which I'd experienced in Bruce Eccles' Java Posse Roundup and the Winter Tech Forum and open spaces. And I've now been to loads of more open spaces since. And so I once had a question to Bruce, which was like, how big can an open space get? Because it's self-organizing. How big can it get? And Bruce said it can go as big as it needs to get. And when it gets too big, it'll split into 2. Like if you have, his experience was like 80, 90, 100, then you can have all of those people participating in the same event. If it gets much bigger than that, your event will just split into 2 events, whether you like it or not, which are happening at the same time in the same venue, because human beings... brackets Dunbar's number is all a bit pseudoscientific. I've done a psychology degree, right? So things like Dunbar's number are a bit pseudoscientific, but at some point humans and the knowledge system decides it can't be that big. So I use this to kind of dodge the question in chapter 17 of the book, which is like, you start small, because we all know starting big always goes wrong, right? You start small and then incrementally move this up, and you add, and this is why the book is structured with like the core pieces, which is the advice process and ADRs. Then you add extra things if you need to kind of make it scale. But at some point you will notice that there are conversations happening which many people don't care about, or there will be things which are so completely diverse or whatever, people working on completely separate pieces of the system. And in that case, you can just like start splitting stuff off and assuming that you can have like 2 sets of advice forums, which is like a weekly meeting, which is a bit like an architecture review board, but you're offering advice, not asking for approval. Those things split up. You can like start subsetting your ADRs into like, these are the ones that everybody cares about. These are the ones that only my team cares about. So you can kind of manage the cognitive load. Fundamentally, you kind of just end up using tricks or experiments, right? Not tricks. You try things and see if they work. You try and manage the cognitive load to build your knowledge architecture, which hopefully follows the knowledge architecture of your systems, right? You're hopefully doing bounded context. So you've kind of managed the cognitive load from a systems perspective. You're kind of managing the cognitive load from a team's perspective, and then you're kind of doing team topologies and stuff. You're hopefully pulling out things like platform type products, internal products and things to basically take your core principles and turn them, make them into codes to make those principles easy to conform to. I know I'm dodging the question. So this is where I said like O'Reilly kind of wanted to know what to do. The answer is like when you feel it, the stress of it not working, that's when you try and split it and you try and find a natural seam. And in my experience, although I love domain-driven design, so I would say this, the domain is where things will split. And so then you split it into kind of anarchistic. Again, the word anarchy doesn't appear in the Martin Fowler blog post, but it does appear in the book. Like, it self-organizes because it's like, right, the human beings are like, this is not working, there's too much happening in one place, so let's split it into two separate pieces and then use platform teams to join everything together, or use principles to join everything together, or use a tech strategy to join everything together. And it kind of self-organizes. But you need to make sure that you are, as someone who is traditionally higher up in a hierarchy, that you're making space to say, right, it feels like people are not happy about this. It feels like people are not, they're not following around. It feels like conversations are too big or too small, or too many people don't care about them, or our architecture is too coupled. This is the benefit why I think it works. And I know it's quite a long rambling answer.
No,
they're like,
really
we're good at, like, we know where our spidey sense from software is, we're like, this is too coupled, or this is not, it's not cohesive enough. We apply that thinking to human being organizations. That's when we know it works. That's my kind of, that's what I should have said at the start. If you kind of apply that thinking, you're like, oh, the conversations aren't cohesive. There's too much coupling, etc., etc. That's the way to do it.
Reminds me a bit of this programmer anarchy talk from Fred George.
Yes.
Must have been like 2012, 13, somewhere.
Yeah. I need to properly rewatch that again, actually, because it's...
Yeah. But I thought it's the best way to organize it is to do this hierarchically, to have a hierarchy. Like, I'm working on
decision records or what?
Oh, the how do we organize seeking advice and organize, let's say, the amount of, the other thing is you have a certain amount of architecture decision records. Let's say you have a confluence space with all the architecture decisions of the whole company, and if you're Google, you get every second an email that something has changed. So actually the company where this person recommended the book to me, they don't do this, but when I talked to them, I was like, they have their setup. I would immediately think that the organizational setup works for advice forums. We haven't talked about advice forums yet. We do it in a second, but so you are a team and you own your decisions, and everyone can, if you're interested in the team, subscribe. The team is part of a larger domain.
Yes.
So now, let's say you're a domain architect. You subscribe to all the decisions of all the teams. And if you're a team, you subscribe to all the decisions of the teams you're interested in. What you said, you have a cohesion and coupling thing, which teams I have a strong coupling to, or I'm dependent on. So there I subscribe. And then above the domain are, I think they call it work streams or some sort of streams. And then you can again subscribe if you're interested in this very high. It's basically they on that level they only have principles. They make only decisions about guiding principles. By the way, we have an episode about guiding principles with your colleague Brigitta Böckeler. Yeah, and I think if you have this hierarchy, it's probably a good start to organize
just for clarification, if you're saying hierarchy, you are referring to like the impact or reach or blast radius of a decision?
Yeah.
So I think, so I agree. Yes, and because I did a talk in Romania yesterday about this. So one of the reviewers of the book was Trond Hjortland. So Trond is like a big sociotechnical thinker and like proper sociotechnical thinking, right? Like the Emorys and like Trond's got various talks about like the history of sociotechnical thought, like when it came out of the mines in Wales in like the 1950s or 1940s. And so I was like very anti-hierarchy because I'd read too many books about anarchy. And Trond was like, hierarchy isn't bad as long as hierarchy is just like you said, Alex, right? Like broader scope, broader time scale, bigger blast radius, more. But it's
Yeah.
It comes with lots of dangers because, number one, the only way we see to organize is a fixed standard hierarchy, which is just copied org design, which like we just all companies do it, right? And then we're like, right, then there's this level of management, then this level of management, then like, so like it needs to be functional and it needs to come from the work. The good thing is like, and this was my argument in my talk yesterday in Romania, we know what our work is, right? We're very clear. We know what we need to build. We're very good at refactoring our code. We're getting better with things like team topologies, like refactoring our org designs, which I think is very good, right? We should be able to, and I've seen, this thing is mentioned in the book, like you could do like a social decision record, which is like we decide to merge these two teams. The two teams have got together and decided they should merge. They shouldn't seek someone else's approval, although they should seek their advice. So if you have a hierarchical level, and just like you described, Sven, right? Like we're very light touch. We're not, and like I don't like the term guardrails because that tells you where you can't go, but it's more like paved roads, right? Which I like more. We want you to go in this direction, so we've made it easier, right? And this is the word that Netflix uses as opposed to guardrails. So therefore, but we know you might go somewhere else, right? Maybe there's a reason to go somewhere else. So, but our principles and maybe they're baked into our non-functional requirements or our platforms and stuff. We've made this easy for you because we want you to hopefully go in this direction. And then lower down, there's some more constraints. But just like, this is the other thing that I was talking about yesterday, Christopher Alexander's pattern language, the patterns start at like a regional level, right? They're like a whole valley or a whole like flat plain of land, right? With loads of different things. And it goes all the way down to where you'll put your windows in a building. So this is like the book which inspired the pattern language that we use in software. The thing is though, like, and this is the problem, the mistake we make. We have like higher level, bigger, broader scope things, but we over specify them. So Christopher Alexander's like pattern, which is something like villages joined by country roads, right? It tells you very little. It's just like there'll be a village and there'll be some country roads. Whereas we're like, sometimes at the high level, we're like, please use SAP version this, and this, and use this programming language. And we over specify as opposed to setting more broader kind of things. And I think if you the layers, but where you have just enough touch to kind of direct things, but without constraining the subsequent decisions which sit inside of those things, that's when I think it works. And that's kind of to Heinrich's point. Finding that thing and like checking when it makes sense, and like you said as well, Sven, right? Like revisiting a decision because you thought it worked, but now it doesn't. Keeping all of that stuff flexible because the system will change and evolve and find its natural place. And as like Simon Wardley would say, right, like we build something, but then it's continually evolving because technology is changing, and what was true yesterday is not true in 3 months' time. Keeping all of this stuff open. So this, I think, is like chapter 14, where I'm like, we pretend like we write code and that's it, but this stuff is changing all of the time. And there's like there's a top-down thing, but there's also a bottom-up, and listening to both of those feedback loops is super important, right? Like one team trying to build one thing will be experiencing the knock-on effects of someone making a decision about a corporate LDAP server 17 years ago. You want to hear that problem as much as you want someone to say, strategically, we're going to go in this direction, right? We're going to adopt open source or something. And you want those two things to come together. And that's where the advice process, I think, is good, because it gives anyone the power to challenge these things, but then they want to, like, the conversations need to happen and stuff. So
I think what I'd like to reiterate here is that hierarchy is absolutely not the company hierarchy. Someone 100%. On the same hierarchy level, but in another subsidiary, taking a decision can have an impact on you.
Yeah, totally. So and when we confuse the two is when we get into trouble, right? So.
Yeah. Exactly. So it's maybe it's even better to look at the communication structures, like Harmel-Law suggests, but it's definitely not the company hierarchy or how the company is structured.
Yeah, there's a super interesting talk actually where so Dr. J. Bloom, who does the most crazy, like super deep, let's read the papers type talks. He did a talk at DDD Europe where basically he went back to the Conway paper and then said, what was everyone else writing about at the same time? But he properly read the Conway paper, right? Not just the one sentence, but all of it. And he talks about like sympoiesis and autopoiesis, which is like the natural evolution of different teams finding their boundaries and finding who has a broader scope, who has a, like if we're peers, then we need to find out where we interface. If we're like broader hierarchy, so I think that's sympoetic, and I'm maybe straying into territory I don't know so much about. But if there's like hierarchy, it's like I have a higher level, broader, but maybe less detailed view, that's autopoetic. They're self-organizing concepts, and they, like as Conway pointed out, they happen whether we like it or not, right? Yeah. But like focusing on those things, and again, and this is where this kind of sociotechnical thing comes in, I think the practice of architecture is not less important, right? It's more important, but being aware to these broader things like the org design, like, you know, the bit, you know, how specific a broader, bigger design is. You want it to be directional but not restrictive, because you want people to still be able to practice architecture within the scope of that decision. It's this is why it's interesting. I would say this because I wrote the book, but I'd like it to unlock a kind of new way of practicing all of this kind of stuff, because I think it's interesting.
Damn it. I thought I just take the organizational structure. So now there is work.
But you just don't want to assume. I mean, this is the classic domain-driven design trick, right? You're like, what are the bounded contexts? You just look at the org chart, and that's what the org thinks it is. Maybe they're wrong, because like, but then you've got like version 0.1 of your domains, bounded context, and you've also got a list of all of the pain points, because everyone will tell you exactly what they hate. So it's not bad, but making it like just another thing that can be designed and changed and updated, I think that's the superpower. I think as software professionals, we should understand this way more. We don't, right? We're like, oh, we're big now, so we need to have a hierarchy. I'm like, but you can make it, right? It doesn't. You can. It's up to you, right? But it isn't, and now because of power dynamics and stuff, right?
Like now that you mentioned the bounded context, that's actually something that I try to emphasize a lot, in terms of we always assume a certain bounded context in terms of like that is not relevant for me, right? But understanding that actually there is no green field without any integration. That is pretty important, I would say. You always have a relationship to someone, and you better understand what type of relationship that is in the domain-driven design, strategic design context.
Right, totally. And there's another thing, because I've reread, because I do this training course on O'Reilly, I've reread the book, the Blue Book, many times. One thing I realized, but I'd not realized for the first 3 times reading it, I had read it for a lot of times, assuming you just kind of like, you find the domain, and the domain tells you what the software looks like. But Eric's very clear. He's like, you co-create, like the domain experts tell you what they think, and then you're like, right, we've got software. But you don't just copy what they tell you. You're like, right, but we have the power to do this differently. Let's co-create a thing, so you know what you need to do because you understand the business problem or the business domain. We understand software, so we can make this easy, right? That's simple. We can fix this. And co-creating something, which was I was like, oh my God, I'd never even noticed that before, because it's very, and I think the org design stuff, this is why I spend ages talking to Trond about this. We just assume that the organization is the organization. Who said? Just because someone, and this is chapter 17 of the book, it's like, half of chapter 17 is how to do this by stealth, so that everyone in the rest of the organization, like HR, don't think you've changed anything, right? So HR are like, oh, there's still 7 teams and they seem to be doing software development. But meanwhile, you've changed all of the stuff, right? So
exactly, doing it in stealth. I think that is the really interesting bit. And that was like also the scaling aspect. My intention was what more like how small can I start, right? I think the entry barrier is 0. You can start this by yourself.
100%. You can do it. If you want to, like, if you have the power to decide, just start following the advice process, because people will be like, wow, you're doing this in the open. If you don't have the power to decide, you can still do it. And then you just take your ADR to the people to seek advice, and then propose it to the person who does have the power to decide and say, we would like to take this decision. We don't have the power to, but we would love you to see what we think and get your feedback on it. And in my experience, like, because sometimes I've run this and like the architects are like, no, I don't approve this. And then it gets to the point where they're like, I trust you. Just make sure you do it properly. I'll just rubber stamp all of the things. So we don't even change the approval process. There is still technically a sign-off process, but they're like, we get it. We've read all the ADRs. I can see you've spoken to this person. I understand that I can see you've done the work. And that's exactly it, Heinrich, they're right. Like you start the small and then you go. And what's also cool is, so I mentioned OpenGI where we first tried this. We were trying this on one program of work so I'm lucky because I'm a consultant. We get brought in. We don't get asked to do everything, to fix everything, because that would be expensive. We're like, here's one project, fix this or work on that project. So me and this Pete Hunter basically did a bunch of mucking about because we'd read the same books. We were like, we think this might work. But we weren't. Another team which were maintaining a Java legacy app were not within scope, but they were advisors, so they kept coming to our architecture advice forum, which was this weekly meeting that where people would talk about ADRs. I discovered after I left that they set up their own version too, completely separately, right? But they were like, this is working really well, and people are like asking our opinions, and we can ask their opinions. And that was super gratifying that people were just like, oh, this seems to, like, people are talking about architecture. This is my big thing. People think that architects talk about architecture. Everyone talks about architecture. It's just that if you don't have any power, you complain about it. And if you do have the power, you worry that someone's going to catch you out because you haven't thought about everything. So,
this is very, very important kind of principle with general organizations, that you kind of either have to percolate information up to the decision maker and write all these reports. So you can kind of empower a higher manager or somebody up there to kind of make a informed decision, right? Or you are handing down the authority and the agency to do decisions further down. And that is, it's scary for many organizations to do, because like, what if something goes wrong? So I think this ADR is right at the heart of this, and the transparency, I think, is the big differentiator here.
100%.
You just mentioned the advice forum.
I did it on purpose, Sven. So I knew it was on your list.
I wanted to come to the advice forum 20 minutes ago, but now we made it.
Sorry.
What is this architecture advice forum?
So it's a good question. So it's not, I think this is maybe the first sentence in the chapter, it is not an architectural review board, although it looks very similar. So it's basically a regular meeting because, like I said, this is based on trust, and I did a bunch of research on trust, and one way to build trust is you see other people doing things, in this case, making decisions, and the more you see them do it in the open, the more you will trust them. Even if I trust them to like annoy me, right? I'm like, Sven's going to make that decision again, which I hate, but like at least I can trust that Sven is consistent. So it's a regular meeting. I thought it was an hour every week until I worked for Zappo, who are a fully remote company, and they were like, we do not want a weekly meeting with 40 plus attendees, because it's an open meeting, anyone can come. And the idea is there's 2 standing agenda items. Anyone got any new spikes? Tell us what spikes you're doing. And that's just for information, because spikes, like I said, Cat Morris figured out that spikes pretty much turn into ADRs. And does anyone have any ADRs? In the larger meeting, people offer advice in the meeting and then are responsible for writing that down. So then you get the practice happening out in the open, which is good, but also people attending can see the practice of architecture happening. So for example, at Zappo, Noosh Streets, the CTO, would come along and basically say nothing, but they could just see that their teams were thinking about architecture, and Noosh didn't need to do anything because it was happening. That was super good. And then so then you could see it happening in Zappo. They because they were like, we don't need no flipping meetings, and they were very good at written communication. They would share the things. They were like, for your information, here's a big significant one coming up. Asynchronously, everyone would write stuff because they were very, very good at written. Their Slack discipline was the best I've ever seen in my entire life. It was terrifying. And they would capture all the stuff and they would write communication. Other things I've seen be added, which are really cool. OpenGI would talk about and this goes to the other chapter that I wrote, because basically that's a case study of what we did at OpenGI. They would report the 4 key metrics, because the 4 key metrics turns out to be, if you need a business case to do some architecture work which doesn't directly have product value, I guarantee it will improve your 4 key metrics unless you are doing a vanity project.
4 key metrics are the DORA 4 key metrics.
Yeah. So lead time for changes, frequency of deployments, change failure rate, and mean time to recovery. If you are doing an architectural improvement or something to your, something to decouple your architecture or make it work better, it will, unless it's a bad improvement, it will have a positive impact on your 4 key metrics. Which is why it's the first chapter in the software architecture metrics book, because it's kind of not a software architecture metric, but I'm like, I don't think I could believe in software architecture metrics, but like it's a second order metric. It's like, if this is good, it will be more deployable, more stable, more easy to change, etc., etc. So,
yeah. One comment definitely on doing it in the open. At my current client, we also introduced those advice forums, of course. Nice. I must say the first time I've seen them was probably 8 years ago here. Alex Heusingfeld introducing them to the place I worked. So he's for a long time in it. But so I also introduced them at my current client. And one thing is, it used to be a regular weekly meeting. We are not so many teams, so whenever. But the thing is, there is just a channel, Microsoft Teams channel. Whenever you have to make a decision, you post. We have the rule: you have to post it like 3 days before, so that everyone can read the ADR. Yeah. And at least my feeling is, and that's also the feedback, you feel very well. You know what you said like half an hour ago, like what are you feeling about this decision? Yep. We kind of all feel very safe because we heard a lot of people. We just heard a lot of people. And what you also said, the opposite is so true. Decisions made beneath the curtain, there is a central service going to build. And you just don't know. You are affected, like everyone else is affected, and they just make this decision in secret. It scares everyone, like it. From morning to evening, and we are always like, do this in the open. It's a much better outcome. Just totally. And it's so important. And I just want to underpin everything.
And this is, and what's interesting is the last thing, and I think I major on this in the book. The problem with architecture review boards is it's like, I'm right, you're wrong. Someone has to win and someone has to lose. Because it's advice, it removes the kind of ego, I need to be right, you need to be wrong. We can just share, I can tell you what I think. You can ignore me, but then I still get to say what I think, and then I should write it down. And so what I've seen is the quality of discussions, because someone doesn't have to win and someone doesn't have to lose. The focus is on the quality of the advice, the reasoning, and not just an opinion. So Diana Montalian pointed that out to me. In review boards, it's opinions. Java's slow, right? Okay. But advice is like, I think Java will be problematic because Java has a known problem with this, and then people can ask you questions, etc., etc. Right? And then you can get to the focus of the real point, as opposed to, here's my opinion, I will be unshaken in this, and like my dominance of Kenny Barschwegler and Heen, I shouldn't have said Heen's name, so I can't remember Heen's surname. But the authors of and Evelyn, the authors of collaborative software design, they talk all about like power. Because there's all these power hierarchies, right? They're all over the place. And it kind of, in many ways, not always, but it removes the power from lots of stuff. Not everything. There's a whole other chapter about like approaching the people for advice who will disagree with you, seeking, like what's it called? Not consent farming, but like farming for dissent. When it's the advice process, right? You have the person who's going to disagree with me has no power to make me say no. I'm more inclined to hear what their concerns are, because I know that I'm not going to lose an argument, but I do want to know why they think that Oracle is a terrible database. Okay, go and tell me why Oracle is a terrible database. So.
Yeah. Also, my engineering manager there, he also joins those meetings. And he makes it very clear from his behavior that, I'm everyone knows he's the hippo, the highest paid person in the room. Yeah. But he's giving advice. And I think that's also important, that the expensive people say, I'm here to give advice. You can say no, you can disagree. You know, it's just my opinion.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Because it is, and it's super interesting how many people who are higher up don't realize this stuff. And then as soon as it becomes advice, they're like, wow, people are disagreeing with me. They never disagreed with me before. And you're like, they told me, they complained to me about it a lot, but like they won't. And so, yeah, this is why it's like, so the word magical is not in Martin Fowler, the blog post which turned into the book, because Martin said, it's maybe not the right word to put it as in a software development paper, but frankly, it's kind of close to magic. Like when you see this stuff, you're like, oh, okay, suddenly, because we're a bunch of smart people who don't know everything, and we all know we don't know everything, but we're trying to do the right thing, build software that makes us happy, that makes us, that we can live in. I think this is my book. Something about living in software is in my next book, right?
Nice.
That's where we spend all our time talking about it and staring at it. And yet we're like this, we have all these power dynamics. So if you can remove lots of the power dynamics, because we have the skills to think about how we structure ourselves, because we think about how we structure our code all the time, I think that's a really powerful way of doing things. So this is the pitch for the new book. I'm not really sure what it is. I don't think O'Reilly will publish it. But something about like taking these skills all the way from like the level of software and writing code and type systems all the way up to like organizing teams, I think is really... I think we're smarter than we know, but we don't realize that we're as smart as we know. That's my...
All right. Yeah. Maybe final questions for everyone?
I'll try and be brief.
Yeah, I mean, as we are... it's 2025, right? I think we have to ask the AI question.
Yes.
So there are like a lot of angles that just listening to this, and I admit a lot of this is first time for me. I'm not more on the SRE side than on the architecture side. So a lot of interesting learnings, but there immediately sometimes the bell was ringing. Hey, isn't that a good use case for AI?
Yep.
And I'm sure you must have had that thought. So what are, from your perspective, kind of the most promising angles on kind of weaving in AI into those kinds of processes?
So it is a really good question. I think, so this was Kent Beck said this, like I'm going to name drop again. So I was judging an O'Reilly kata yesterday, architectural kata with Kent Beck. And Kent Beck's big thing was, and this is a Toyota thing, right? This isn't to bring it to SRE. This is explicitly in the Toyota way. Like AI and robots in the Toyota case are like as partners of human beings, right? They're helping you out and doing stuff. I think if you know how to do prompting and all of this kind of stuff, having a second brain or a second way of thinking about things, or something which is very good at going out and collecting lots of information, something which is very good about like pointing out flaws in your thinking. There's a whole, Sven might remember this, buried somewhere deep in the book is like blind spots. Like we talked about the unknown unknowns and all of this kind of stuff, right? You could use something like that to like AIs and LLMs that could far more, if you've got it all written, if you've got your ADR history and your code base and all of the other stuff written down, it could bring all of this stuff together, right? First with RAG and things which are well established these days, although like well established, a few years old. But it could be incredibly powerful. I still think one thing would be terrifying. I would definitely always want to have a human being who's accountable and responsible for the decision. It shouldn't be an AI deciding to do it. Yep. And I would still want to explicitly prompt it and feed it to make it do things, because my big thing is, you shouldn't outsource your thinking to an AI, because the thinking is how you understand it, and it's not just like, it's how you understand what you have as a result of the thinking. But as a thinking aid and a thinking tool, just like a robot in a Toyota production system, I think is incredibly powerful. And I think that would be super interesting to see all of this kind of stuff, right? So
yeah, I want to just point out that this is the fuel angle. This is like, okay, you have all this knowledge base, and then kind of fueling an AI that can help you as an advisor or a code reviewer in your engineering. Yep. I think that's really powerful, and also like consistent with things I've seen elsewhere.
And also things like other stuff, like I spend another chapter talking about like how to make decisions smaller, because one of the curses, I read The Principles of Product Development Flow by Don Reinertsen, and his big thing was like small, like single piece flow, right? But single piece flow in a non-deterministic system, right? Which is far, not like Toyota. You want Toyota production to be deterministic. We're not building recipes, right? We're building individual things every single time. Small pieces, like helping you like split decisions down doing things like what's the time bound on this decision, etc., etc., kind of stuff like Alex mentioned. It could be a really good coach for all of the kind of ways of thinking about this kind of stuff. Be really interesting to see. It would remind me, because I talk about this stuff, but I forget about it half the time. So
yeah, I mean, exploring options, for example, is for me one of my major, let's say, the killer use case for AI when I write ADRs.
Yeah.
That's
100%.
Actually helps me to reflect on all the note pieces that I take in my note-taking system. Yeah. So every week I do a review session, and that helps a lot to like distill what were the thoughts that I want to revisit. How do they connect to previous thoughts from months ago? Yeah, that helps a lot, like a saddle custom thingy.
Yeah. No, definitely.
I have to say I'm still, like, my thoughts are still wrapped around what you said when we were talking about the advice forums, Andrew. It basically struck me when you said, well, don't call it architecture review. And the reason why this struck me is I'm doing tech reviews with our teams because I want to learn what they learned. I want to look at what they looked at, what they thought about the decisions that they made. And more often than not, I get this feeling that they think they need to justify in front of me.
Yep.
And I was just thinking, maybe it's because I called the meeting a tech review and not a tech, I don't know, presentation or something. So could it really be in the wording?
I think the names of stuff is super powerful, really interesting. And that's why, like I said, I spend the first bit is like, this is not a review board. No one is here. You're not asking for permission. It's very interesting. Because when people are safer, again, there's a whole chapter on this, very DEI, it's all before Trump, right? But it's like, software is built by groups of people, and software is built best by groups of people who have different perspectives, different skills, different, there's a junior developer in one of the examples in my book called Rita. Rita is the name of my editor, who is not a software professional, but Rita kept asking really good questions. And I was like, everybody has a role to play in this. And if you get this, I mean, like, the best thing I've learned from people, junior developers, is like, they'll ask about things which aren't clear, and you're like, if this was better, this would be clear, right? We would have properly managed the naming, we would have properly managed the cognitive load, we would have properly managed the bounded context. And it took me 15, 20 years of my career to realize that me feeling stupid was not always me being stupid. Sometimes it was a signal that things were more complicated than they needed to be. But like, we build a big ball of mud, right? Because we're like, some people are very good at, I think my superpower is I am not as good as most of architects. So my tolerance for big balls of mud is way lower than everyone else's, because I cannot cope with a big ball of mud. And everyone else is like, I'm pretty smart. I can cope with a medium-sized ball of mud.
That's actually the perfect bridge to what I wanted to ask as a closing question, because I saw on the companion side for your book that you thanked Rita for saying, you wrote, I've tried to put the most relevant information in the book and other important but not essential information here.
Yep.
And I was like, yeah, there's always more to share. Like, how do you actually decide what not to share, because it might easily overwhelm people? So how do you select, for example, in such an advice forum, what not to share, because it's important, but it's not essential? And
that's a good question.
Maybe you can resonate with that and give some advice, like maybe how you did it with the book.
So I'm the worst. The irony is, I'm the worst person to ask. So I can't remember if I mentioned this during the podcast or before. Bruce Eckel, who's read the book, said, there's lots of good bits in there, and then there's a lot of other, he didn't say this, but like, he basically went, it's too long. And it is, I will admit, it is very long. Hopefully each chapter is kind of standalone. Sven can tell you what he thinks, but there's a lot. And the act of making things It is a lot shorter than it was. And but it could be a lot shorter. Like I reviewed, the reason I was speaking to Bruce is because I spoke to him in another podcast about the book he'd written. Their book is 80 pages long, and it's like super focused. And so to take it to the advice thing, I'm probably the worst person to ask because
But you had the experience with Rita.
Yeah, exactly.
So what did she do to?
So what Rita does is actually, this is good. Rita would encourage me, and Diana Montalian would encourage me to do this too. Like, you write, what you need to do is get comfortable with editing and losing things, and it's very hard. I realized a lot about my life changed when I wrote this book, because I didn't, like, you're like, I'm smart. O'Reilly are asking me to write a book, so I must be pretty good at this stuff. I was not good at writing, it turned out. And so Rita who had no technical background, obviously she's an editor of technical books, but she's not a software engineer or architect, but her questions were they went to my ego. I'm a lot less egotistical about my code, but it turns out I'm very egotistical about my writing. And each month, like, we'd have a chat every month or every 2 weeks, I think. It was hard because Rita would give me some very direct, very honest, very valid feedback. She would dissect, pull apart, like chapters. I think we got to chapter 14 before Rita said, this is a good chapter. Right? So there's a lot. You should have seen some of the earlier drafts. But like Rita made this book. This is why Rita is very early on in the thing. It's very hard. So like, but what I've learned is, and this, you can see this in how I speak. I'll talk a lot and then I'll eventually come to a conclusion. It's good, but then editing it, bringing it down. Like, I'll go broad and then you'll bring it down. And I think you need to have the things, you put them out in the open, and like with code, right, you'll do it, and then like, Kent Beck, like red, green, refactor. What does it need to do? Make it do it, then you refactor it. I could have refactored this book a lot more, let's be honest. Please buy my book. I would love your feedback. But there are bits which won't be for everybody. It's like I spoke to Eric Evans, and he was like, Eric, I think, regrets putting the second half of his book at the end and the first half at the start. I think he would put them the other way around. I disagree. I think his book is in the right order, but I guarantee half the people who read my book won't read the end. I think all of that stuff is more important, but people are like, right, Andrew's told us how to do it. Now I'm going to get going. The rest is advice. It's like, right, when you try this, like you said, Sven, right, you'll try this won't work. You'll try this will fail. You'll try this. It's just things that I've learned. I'm not telling you to do it, but I'm like, here is stuff I have learned. So I couldn't edit it out. That's my problem. I could have been a lot shorter.
So would you have to write a second book? You would start the same way? Like, write it out and then condense?
What I would do is, so I've learned this from Bruce, because they talked about this. They were very, 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 very strict about who the audience for the book was and what that book reader was trying to achieve. And they would then experiment with removing even more concepts. So because it was a book about code, it was about effect-oriented programming. They were like, I wonder if, it took them longer to write, but they were like, I wonder if we just completely remove this concept, does the whole book fall apart? And they would remove the concept and the book would fall apart. So they put it back in. But then they'd remove another concept and they're like, this is a lot better. And I'm in awe. Like, I'm like, wow, it's amazing. But I had 2 years to write the book, and it's taken a long time. So like, I need to stop now. But
yeah, I think the dynamics of this are actually changing. I think audio content is becoming a lot more relevant than a lot of the written content.
Yep.
And also producing stuff just by mumbling and having AI kind of have massage it is really changing the game when it comes to content creation.
Yeah.
And I mean, the old saying of like, start at the top, not at the front, right? You want to kind of put the framing in place before you kind of start piling on.
Yeah.
That is totally. still good advice.
And I think, and hopefully you could read the first part of each of my chapters and then it would still make sense, because later on, this is like Rita did, like you mentioned, Heinrich, right? Like the pyramid.
Yeah.
It definitely is. The mistake I kept making was I would bury, because I do too many talks at conferences, where you bury the reveal at the end. And Rita was like, why do I have to get to the end of the chapter before you tell me why it's important? Tell me at the start. So hopefully you could read the first bit of each chapter and then you're like, oh, this is good. And then keep going. And at some point you're like, I'm bored and I'll skip to the next piece. That might work.
And then there is this books where it's like they have 3 good chapters, and then it's just anecdotes about why this is again true.
Yeah. So hopefully mine is like, this is the key thing. Here's a bunch, and it'll get more personal. Boof, another thing, more personal. Boof. So it's hopefully, but yeah, we'll see.
All right.
Good. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you for having me. Lovely to meet you.
Yeah, it was a good chat. Awesome. Again, we mentioned a lot of things, a lot of books, or not we, but mostly Andrew.
It's going to be long show notes.
It will be probably the longest show notes we've ever had.
Longest show notes ever.
Thank you very much for coming, and looking forward to your new book.
When I figure out what it's going to be.
Also, I personally say I'm looking forward. I have the metrics book, but I haven't read it. But
the first chapter is great. I'm not sure about the rest of the book.
So thanks everyone for listening. If you made it so far, please give us feedback, buy the book, and see you next time.
Leave some LinkedIn comments on what you want to hear next.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Thanks a lot, guys. Bye.